So the first lecture will deal with the past, and it will start by addressing the ancient world, the old world, and how that ancient world and the old world was disrupted. So in understanding the ancient world, the place of African civilization is critical to the development of all civilizations in the world. This is a story well told, and as I said, partly exposed and articulated by Sheikh Anta Diop. We are talking about the Egyptian civilization. It was not the most ancient. The most ancient was the Nubi civilization. And you will know that there was interaction between the Nubi civilization and the Egyptian civilization. Some of them even categorize them as the old kingdom and the new kingdom, the lower kingdom and the upper kingdom. And also we'll be talking about other civilizations, like the Ethiopian civilization. And we will also be looking at other civilizations in all parts of Africa, because in all parts of Africa, there were civilizations that made great contribution to humanity. But if you talk about the most celebrated, that has even created a whole subject matter, a whole science, the Egyptian civilization, there are very many people who would like to refute and refuse that the idea of Egypt, lower, upper, old, new, was a civilization of black people. And they have gone to great lengths to create the idea that Egypt was not an African civilization. Some of them have gone as far as claiming that it is an alien civilization. But it is important to ask our young people that in this lecture, you'll be exposed to ideas, to information, to knowledge, to transformative processes that you will not ordinarily get in school. And it doesn't matter which school you went to in Kenya, and it doesn't matter which university you went to. If you come across this information and knowledge, it will be at the surface. You will hardly scratch the surface. We will also examine the interaction of these great African civilizations with other civilizations. Assyrian civilization, the Greek civilization. A lot of people talk about the Greek civilization. The Greek civilization had an intimate interaction with the Egyptian civilization. And the Greek scholars, and you don't need to trust my words, you need to read Greek records and Egyptian records. No scholar, no intellectual, no scientist from Greece would be considered as refined and accomplished if they did not go for education in Egypt. And this is for all of them, including the great philosophers. They had to go and get their education in Egypt. What they call Pythagoras' theorem, attributing it to Pythagoras, he went and learned it in Egypt. Egyptians would not be able to build the pyramids without understanding that A squared plus B squared is equal to C squared. This Pythagoras theorem. And many innovations which are attributed to other civilizations, including Greek, came from Egypt. So this world had an ecosystem based on the East. For those who are believers of either Christianity or Islam, they would know there is great interaction between Christianity, Islam, with Egypt. You would know that Moses was in Egypt. You would know that Jesus, according to traditional Christian traditions, went to seek protection and the family became a refugee family in Egypt. The story of Joseph in the Bible is not complete until the sojourners of Joseph, or in Islamic tradition, you say Yusuf, to Egypt. The Muslim record would show the first Muslim community was not established in Mecca. It was not established in Medina, but it was established in Ethiopia. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, may peace and blessings be upon him, sent a whole community of Muslims to seek refuge in Ethiopia. And there they found protection, and there they thrived. This was before the Muslim could form a community in Medina and could form a community in Mecca. So I don't want to go too much into the details of this ancient and old world. This will be part of that first lecture. That first lecture would also have a component that explains how this old world, old order, ancient civilization, not one, many civilizations, was circumvented, was destroyed, was interfered with, and how it was disrupted, including in places where there was interaction in peace and knowledge. So this first lecture will also deal with this disruption caused by a conference held between the Pope, the King of Portugal, and the two royal families of Spain. And we'll talk about this conference and how the Pope divided the world into two and gave one part of the world to the Portuguese and the other part of the world to the Spanish. This is what they call discovery. We shall look at the authority of the Pope, both religious and legal, through the use of papal bulls that authorized these two nations to invade these civilizations, to conquer these civilizations, to utterly destroy these civilizations. And this story of these papal bulls define the concept of conquest, where our people are directed to invade other people, to conquer them, to destroy them, to capture their property, and to capture their bodies. It authorized slavery. This also authorized colonialism. And this architecture is what some people call the age of discovery, where Europeans discovered less advanced people. So when you're thinking, if we said civilizations that had reached levels of amazing transformation and development, then how would you justify attacking them? So this partly goes into the motivation of these European powers, the two European powers, and the people who they sent. In this first lecture, we will also look at those who were sent. Vasco da Gama for the Portuguese and Christopher Columbus for the Spanish. And all of them were looking out to become rich and dominant. But today we have an age where you say it is the post-truth age, an age where you can't tell what are lies and what is the truth, an age where people will have to reason, to investigate, to analyze, to know what is true. But what you don't know is this post-truth age started more than 500 years ago. And I'll give you examples. So what do the textbooks in schools tell people was the reason why Vasco da Gama went to look in the East? They'll tell you two reasons. Two reasons. He went for two reasons. The first one was that they were looking for the land of spices and riches and clothing. At that time, in this newer world in Europe, they did not have cotton. They did not have clothes made of cotton. Most of their clothes were made from animal skins. So they were looking for these riches in the East. But they will also tell you they were looking for a mythical African king called Prester John. But all these were lies. Evidence shall show that this was a military expedition. Evidence shall show Vasco da Gama was a master torturer. Evidence shall show this was an adventure looking for slaves. Evidence shall show these were adventures looking to conquer others. And it was a military expedition based on subterfuge. They will raise white sails if they are approaching Muslim lands, and they will bring them down and raise a white sail embossed with a purple or red cross when they think they are not near anywhere where Muslims are. It will show that part of the military expedition was released hardcore prisoners who were attracted to freedom and the misadventure of killing and pillaging. But we will also show that, for example, in Kenya, many young Kenyans do not know this, that when Vasco da Gama arrived in Mombasa in 1498, he introduced an old phenomena that has been reinvented in this new age, what is called in the military jargon, shock and awe, that they bombarded Mombasa for no good reason except that Mombasa refused their demands. But this story in part 1 of the lecture of the making of Kenya will also indicate that the Portuguese were on and off in Kenya with their domination agenda for more than 250 years. Did you hear that? 250 years. And this is almost twice, more than twice, the period the British were here. How come young people don't know that we had 4 different colonial forces in Kenya? Starting with the Portuguese, then the Arabs, then the British, but also in a small part of what is called the Witu Swahili state, the Germans. Young Kenyans, if they were told Germans were also an occupying force in Kenya, they'll be rolling their eyes and say, what? But that is the story we'll be telling. In that part of this lecture, we will also tell the story of the historic resistance and struggles in different time periods facing these different colonial forces to liberate what became Kenya. We will also go into the last bastions of colonialism, which is the British colonialism that made Kenya an entity of 3 parts, or 3 distinct different entities. The Kenya colony, the Kenya protectorate, and what was called the Northern Frontier districts. and the struggle against the British. And when the British closed all the avenues for peaceful negotiation, for peaceful petitioning, for peaceful struggle, then the people had no choice but to start an armed struggle. And we will say that is part of the nature of what is called the settler colony. The settler colony. And we will look into the various communities, the various progressive forces that participated in the struggle to remove colonialism from our land. Culminating in what was called the 3 Lancaster conferences, leading into negotiations on how to give independence to Kenya. We shall look at how, in the language of Alatas, there was an elite prepared whose minds had been captured. They had captive minds and had been prepared to continue the domination of the British in our nation using other means. We shall also look at the tensions between the various forces that contributed to the struggle of independence. We shall also look at the category of collaborators who wanted British rule to continue for a few more years, 10 years, 20 years. They were claiming Kenya is not ready for independence. We shall look at also the colonial settler who was swearing that they will never allow for an independent Kenya. And the first lecture will end at independence, when the Kenyan new flag was hoisted and the Union Jack was lowered once and for all and for the future. And that would be the end of the first lecture.